Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. George Floyd's family reaches a massive settlement deal with the city of Minneapolis. The family comments as the jury selection process continues for police officer Derek Chauvin's trial. Controversy growing over tight security on Capitol Hill. A memo reveals the National Guard chief advised against extending the troops' deployment just before the Pentagon approved the extension. The family of the January 6th Capitol protester, who was shot and killed, has hired an attorney. The lawyer will probe her death, though the family says answers have been hard to come by. New York's Governor Cuomo is at the center of a storm of allegations, with 11 Democratic representatives and 2 senators now pushing for his swift resignation. Minneapolis reached a giant settlement with the family of George Floyd. Lawyers, city leaders, and Floyd's family spoke about the deal. NTD's Christina Kim has the story.
The city of Minneapolis agreed to pay the family of George Floyd a whopping $27 million. An attorney for the Floyd family called this the largest pretrial civil rights settlement ever.
It says to America that we can do more than just point fingers, accuse one another, and engage in more division. We can actually come together and make things better.
$500,000 of the settlement will go to George Floyd Square in Minneapolis. Another lawyer challenged corporations to match that number to show that they, quote, really care, and asked the city to memorialize Floyd. Mayor Jacob Frey promised a more just approach to community and safety.
We need to be unrelenting. We need to be unapologetic in our pursuit of a more equitable local government.
Floyd's family members also spoke.
But this is a small, big step in the George Floyd legacy.
Meanwhile, the jury selection continues on its 7th day for former police officer Derek Chauvin. Chauvin was involved in the arrest of Floyd and is being charged with his murder. Reporters asked if news of this announcement could prevent the jurors from being impartial, and asked why they didn't wait until the trial ended to make this announcement.
We're not going to delay justice because we're worried about the outcome of a criminal trial that we all pray, what outcome we want.
So far, 7 of the 14 jurors have been selected. Christina Kim, NTD News.
As the allegations against Governor Cuomo grow, so is the mounting pressure from lawmakers calling for either his resignation or for his impeachment. Bipartisan pressure has been mounting not only at the state level, but now at the federal level as well. 19 of New York State's 27 congressional representatives are Democrat. Of those, 11 are calling for the governor's resignation. Representative Jerry Nadler stated, Governor Cuomo has lost the confidence of the people of New York, and Governor Cuomo must resign. The Gothamist, a New York publication, tweeted that the governor had resigned and later took the tweet down, making some believe that they had the template ready to go live in the event of the governor's resignation. And during a conference call with the media on Friday, Cuomo took aim at politicians who have called for his resignation. He said again that he would not resign.
Politicians take positions for all sorts of reasons, including political expediency and bowing to pressure. But people know the difference between playing politics, bowing to cancel culture, and the truth. Let the review proceed. I'm not going to resign. I was not elected by the politicians. I was elected by the people.
And Democratic Senators Chuck Schumer and Kristen Gillibrand have joined the other Congress members to call for Cuomo's resignation. And with bipartisan support for the case of resignation and impeachment for the governor growing, we look at what impeachment may look like in New York State.
As more allegations against Governor Cuomo are mounting, so is the push here at the State House in Albany for either his resignation or impeachment.
The mix of allegations includes accusations of now 6 women, as well as his mishandling of nursing homes during the pandemic. The push has gained bipartisan support. This week, Democrats like Mayor de Blasio are speaking out, as well as New York State Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie, who just authorized an impeachment investigation into the governor. New York Assembly Minority Leader William Barkley has been a leading voice for the case of impeachment.
We are pushing for an impeachment resolution. We called for that on Monday because we think the totality of the situations makes the state currently ungovernable for the governor.
He can no longer serve as governor. It's as simple as that.
The nursing home allegations stem from a March 2020 order during the height of the pandemic, moving potentially COVID-positive patients back to nursing homes. The memo from the Department of Health to nursing home facilities stated that no resident shall be denied readmission or admission to a nursing home solely based on a confirmed or suspected diagnosis of COVID-19.
There's been one bombshell after another. You go back to the Attorney General's nursing home report where she found that the executive branch, the governor, was undercounting nursing home fatalities by as much as 50%.
Impeachment procedures vary state by state. Here in New York, the only governor to have ever been impeached was Governor William Solzer, impeached in 1913, more than 100 years ago.
If we follow precedents the best we can, we would pass the impeachment resolution. From that, articles of impeachment would be drafted. They're sent over to the Senate. Pursuant to the state constitution, the Senate has 60 days to act. And essentially, they would have a trial on the articles of impeachment. You could almost equate that to a criminal complaint, and then the trial would be done in the Senate with all the senators and the Court of Appeals being the jury for that trial.
With bipartisan support against the governor building and more allegations coming to light, one thing is certain. Governor Cuomo will be facing an uphill political battle in the coming weeks. Steve Gelati, NTD News, New York.
The White House is still gathering information on the Microsoft hack that affected hundreds of thousands of customers worldwide. They said they can't pin the blame on anyone yet, but they soon will be able to. NTD's Kevin Hogan has the details.
Happy Friday.
The U.S. is urgently responding to the massive Microsoft Exchange hack. That's according to Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan. He said hackers are still inside some Microsoft Exchange systems a week after it began.
It is still ongoing in the sense that we are still gathering information. We are still trying to determine the scope and scale. It is significant. But the precise number of systems that have been exposed by this vulnerability and have been exploited either by nation-state threat actors or ransomware hackers or others, that is something that we are urgently working with the private sector to determine.
Sullivan said there are several recent hacks that have caused the development of a new cyber working group. Those are the Microsoft and SolarWinds hacks, combined with cyber attacks against other members of what's called the Quad. The Quad consists of the U.S., Japan, India, and Australia. He says they all have a common challenge facing cyber attacks from state-sponsored hackers and others. China has been said to be behind the Microsoft hack, but the White House has not confirmed that.
I'm not in a position standing here today to provide attribution, but I do pledge to you that we will be in a position to attribute that attack at some point in the near future, and we won't hide the ball on that. We will come forward and say who we believe perpetrated the attack.
Sullivan shifted gears, claiming Biden has taken a hardline approach to Russia for allegedly poisoning Navalny, and Saudi Arabia after its crown prince allegedly approved the murder of Washington Post journalist Khashoggi. And he claims Biden has taken a firm line with China as well.
The United States, as he has said repeatedly, believes that we are going to end up in a stiff competition with China, and we intend to prevail in that competition. And he is amassing the sources of strength we need to be able to prevail. And that is 100% in line with everything that Joe Biden said on the campaign trail. And 50 days in, we believe we are in a better position to deal with the challenge from China than we were the day that he took office. Yeah.
In terms of the Microsoft hack, Sullivan said ultimately it's up to the private sector to solve the problem, and he says the Biden administration will give them additional resources to do so. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
The Christian Defense Coalition is calling on NBC not to broadcast the Beijing Olympics next year. They're warning that the Chinese regime will use NBC to boost its own image and cover up its human rights abuses. NTD's Don Tran has the details.
Outside NBC studio headquarters in New York City, the Christian Defense Coalition is demanding that the news company not broadcast the 2022 Beijing Olympics. The coalition calls the Beijing Olympic Games the Genocide Games. It will take place in Communist China, amid the communist regime's persecution of prisoners of conscience, religious believers, and ethnic minorities.
China is committing genocide against Uyghurs, brutalizing Christians and bulldozing their churches, crushing Falun Gong practitioners, body harvesting, trampling free speech, political dissidents, intellectual dissidents, brutalizing their own people, and of course, their oppression of the precious city of Hong Kong.
47 Hong Kong activists were arrested recently for holding a primary election last year. Beijing accused them of violating the so-called national security law. They could be sentenced to life in prison. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has also detained more than 1 million Uyghur and other Muslim minorities in internment camps. Detainees report being subjected to torture, rape, forced labor, and political indoctrination. The Christian Defense Coalition warns NBC that if they broadcast the Beijing Games, the CCP will be able to show a positive but false image of Communist China. At the same time, the regime will hide its human rights atrocities.
NBC, if you have a conscience, use it, examine it.
Don't broadcast these games. Do not provide this press opportunity, this photo op for the world to see that China is innocent.
The group says they're willing to take a step further by urging NBC and other media to report more on the CCP's human rights abuses.
If America knew what we knew, they wouldn't even switch the television on for 1 second to watch the games. NBC would never broadcast them. So part of the collective effort is for our large media corporations to tell the truth on what's going on in China right now.
So far, NBC has not communicated with the Christian Defense Coalition. The coalition said they'll be hosting more public events to protest the main sponsors of the Beijing Olympics, and they'll also be reaching out to politicians here in the United States to bring more attention to this issue. Don Tran, NTD News, New York.
Over 2,000 troops continue to stand guard at the U.S. Capitol, but an uncovered memo reveals that the Guard chief advised against extending troop deployment just before the Pentagon approved the extension. NTD's Melina Wisecup brings us more from Capitol Hill.
These National Guard troops here in D.C. were supposed to be headed home today, but after the Pentagon extended their mission for over 2 more months, it's unclear when exactly they'll be headed home. And this extended mission is growing in controversy from both government officials here in D.C. as well as just everyday citizens.
I think it's warranted, but I do think that they'd be wise to just draw down the troops a little bit.
Part of my frustration with the National Guard being here at the Capitol is the fact that when our nation was in turmoil in Portland, in Wisconsin, in Minnesota, we were hesitant to send the National Guard in to protect those shop owners and the people who live there. Why is our administration's life so much more important than the common person?
In a joint bipartisan statement, the House Armed Services Committee now calling to reduce security on the Hill. Representatives Adam Smith, a Democrat, and Mike Rogers, a Republican, wrote that some level of support from the Guard should stay in D.C., but that it should be re-evaluated to determine how much support is actually needed. They also point to the costs of the tightened security. And Democrat Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton introduced legislation to prohibit using federal funds to install permanent fencing around any part of the Capitol grounds. But some citizens tell us they prefer a permanent fix.
Probably will need some kind of security personnel there, not necessarily the National Guard in the future, though.
For now, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the troops will remain as long as they are needed. But the Guard chief raised concerns about prolonging the deployment, saying they don't have enough volunteers. In a memo sent before the Pentagon approved the extension, the chief said governors are expressing an unwillingness to order troops to the Capitol, as states continue to grapple with issues at home, like the pandemic, weather catastrophes, and riots. Now, the Guard's extended mission here will be re-evaluated at the end of May, so it's possible that their mission could be extended past that May 23rd deadline. Now, the question on the minds of many is how long this tight security around the Capitol will last. Reporting in D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
And an investigation still underway looking into the cause of death from a guardsman who was found dead Thursday morning. Authorities say he died from a medical emergency and that he wasn't on duty at the time. The family of Capitol Hill protester Ashli Babbitt is seeking answers in the January 6th killing of their loved one. Still, details of the case remain vague. NTD's Steve Lance brings us more.
The family of the woman killed during the January 6th Capitol Hill protests has hired an attorney to investigate the shooting that killed the 36-year-old woman. Lawyer Terrell Roberts is representing the family of Ashli Babbitt, who was killed by an unidentified Capitol police officer. The family's attorney alleges that Babbitt was killed without notice to comply and insists had she been given that opportunity, she would have done so.
If she got through that window, he would have time to confront her, step out, confront her, give verbal commands, give her a warning if he's going to shoot.
He notes that Ashli's 14-year military background would have given her sufficient judgment to understand the weight of such a command.
From Ashli's vantage point, there's no way she could have heard such a warning. He is concealing himself or hiding in a room. He's wearing a mask.
So far, the officer who shot Babbitt has not been identified, and there has been no official summary of the incident provided by the Capitol Police. Attorney Roberts says that from his experience, this is very uncommon.
Normally, the police agency would issue a statement explaining the case, explaining what happened, and identifying the officer, might indicate what his status is, if he's on administrative leave or whatever. Nothing like that's been issued by the U.S. Capitol Police.
According to the Babbitt family lawyer, the United States Attorney is conducting a criminal investigation, and the D.C. Metro Police is conducting an internal affairs investigation. Steve Lance, NTD News.
And if you would like to see the full interview with the Babbitt family attorney, make sure to tune in this Saturday to NTD's The Nation Speaks at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And Reuters reports that the Mexican president is worried Biden's asylum policies are encouraging organized crime and boosting human trafficking. A cartel expert says the same thing. In fact, he says the cartels are smuggling so many migrants, they need new methods of tracking them. NTD's Grace Coulter has the story.
But we never talk about the core problem, and that is the Mexican cartels.
Speaking with American thought leaders, Jason Jones, a former captain of the Texas Department of Public Safety, says it's time for Mexican cartels to be designated as a terrorist organization so that law enforcement can go after them directly.
The cartels have gone through such quantum leaps in how they control and become a parallel government in Mexico. And these stories are not getting out. So when you talk about, what level of control does the cartel have at our southern border, it is 100%. They control it all.
Jones says to the cartels, people are a commodity. He said they look at the migrants as if they're nothing. He said they regularly carry out sexual assault and mass killings on the migrants. And now, under the Biden administration's immigration policies, Jones says the cartels are smuggling people across the border in numbers that are now overwhelming the cartels themselves. So they are resorting to a new method to keep track of the migrants and their payments: wristbands.
Well, on that band, you've got a specific marking that identifies, like one of the first ones we saw was a turtle, for example. That identifies a specific smuggling group working with Cartel de Golfo, or what is also known as the Gulf Cartel. It had the word metal on it. Now, that word metal meant that the peso or the tax had been paid. And then the final thing, and the most concerning on, was the number. There was a numbering system on it.
He says that in addition to taking the migrants' identification info, contact, and destination, the cartels also call the migrants' family in their country of origin and get the family's address. Here's why.
We're going into a realm of debt bondage. The prices at the border, the cartels are really charging a lot more than we've seen historically. So I'll give you a great example. The Cartel del Noreste and the Gulf Cartel are charging for migrants who come from Honduras and Guatemala and Venezuela, $3,000 to cross. Now, that's just at the river. Well, a lot of them can't pay that. That's a lot of money. So they'll pay $1,000 up front. Now they're indebted. Now they move into the United States, they cross, but they are indebted to a criminal organization in a foreign country while living in the United States.
Jones says the cartels are much bigger than just a U.S.-Mexico problem. One cartel is now in 48 countries. And Jones says it's not only South American migrants crossing the border into the U.S.
Throughout the campaign, the Biden administration said that if people are going to cross, they're going to be let in the country. And you have to understand that was like a beacon to folks all over the world.
He says they're now finding migrants coming from countries like Africa and China. And he says more are on the way, each one a potential client for the cartels. Grace Coulter, NTD News.
People are looking forward to receiving another round of stimulus checks, but to some, it's unclear why certain industries are supported and others aren't. NTD's Arian Pazdar has the story.
Both restaurants and gyms were closed due to the lockdown, which means neither of them could make any money. Now on Thursday, President Biden signed a $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, which is supposed to restore financial losses. Gym owners are left wondering why they aren't included in that package, but restaurants are. One Manhattan gym says the financial support is badly needed. Their business has been hit especially hard.
I had to fight through it in the beginning, and we were successful to a point. But yeah, we did. We're closing our business.
The people we spoke with said gyms are important for mental health, which is especially needed amid stay-at-home orders and lockdowns.
Absolutely. I always feel like my best self after I've gotten a good workout in, and when you feel good about yourself, you're healthier mentally.
I do believe it's very important for your mental health and physical health.
That's a form in a way that we can let off some steam.
A New Jersey gym agrees, saying the industry is important for people to deal with the pandemic. That's why they say it should have been included in the relief package.
So to not include that in the bill is, it makes you really scratch your head. It doesn't make any sense. It's nonsensical.
He added that smaller gyms might have it easier to make it through the rest of the pandemic because they can adapt better than big chains. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
A New York City Christian school is distributing a new 12-page guide about inclusive language. It aims to ban what they consider hateful words. NTD's Arian Pazdar has the story.
The Grace Church School here in Manhattan is asking students to stop referring to their parents as mom and dad. Rather, they should call them grown-ups, folks, or guardians. It's an attempt to make everyone feel included. Now their new 12-page guide on inclusive language also makes clear on how to talk about sexual orientation, gender, and race. The school already recognizes language that promotes racism, homophobia, and other forms of discrimination. Those are addressed in their school handbooks, but they want to do more to ban what they consider hateful language. But one expert says doing so might have a problematic outcome in the future.
We need children growing up believing that their involvement in their future children's life is critical, and also understanding that their parents' involvement in their life now is important.
The school aims to make children who don't have parents in their lives feel more included, which is one of the reasons why they released the new guidelines. But changing the terms mom and dad might not accomplish that goal.
They, of all children, understand that it matters to have a mom and dad, and having people at their school telling them that it doesn't matter, that they shouldn't feel bad about them, is not going to be helpful.
The Grace Church School isn't the only one adopting inclusive language. Over in the UK, the University of Manchester released a similar guide on inclusive language. Words like man and woman aren't appropriate anymore for university material. Rather, they should be called individuals. Now, their guide also includes terms describing age. You shouldn't call someone an elderly person or a youngster anymore. Arian Pastar, NTD News, New York.
New York public school enrollment has dropped by 4% this year. With schools closed, then open, then closing again, parents are more concerned than ever about public education. NTD's Lin here brings us more.
New York City parents are turning to private and charter schools. Public school enrollment has dropped by 43,000 students this year. Meanwhile, charter school sector enrollment increased by 10,000 students.
And roughly we lost about 6% of our kids.
which is like 2,400 kids we lost. They left the public school system, and that figure is about right when you look at the other districts.
With birth rates shrinking and charter popularity rising, the nation's largest school district enrollment has been eroding for years. But the open, then closed policy changes during the pandemic has sped up this year's drop. Last month, New York City's Department of Education decided to replace the Gifted and Talented program with the lottery system. Phil Wong believes that will make things worse.
Parents will simply vote with their feet. They will just go elsewhere where they offer a better education system.
A recent report on migration from Hire a Helper finds New York to be the #2 most moved out of state last year, with a net loss of 49%. With libraries and museums closed for months, families are looking for places where kids can access more for lower cost.
This is exactly what happened in the late 70s and early 80s. There are huge deficits in the city budget, and people left and never came back.
Since funding is tied to enrollment, fewer students is an alarm bell for the city's public educators. Administrators are getting ready to see narrower budgets coming down the pipe. Reporting by Lin Lin, NTD News, New York.
California Disneyland finally has the green light to reopen, and city officials and business leaders are calling on the governor to release guidelines and a timeline for business meetings and conventions. NTD's Jack Bradley has the story.
California's Disneyland is back. The theme park is set to reopen late April as COVID cases continue to fall in the state.
After months of uncertainty, we now have a path forward for the Disneyland Resort and Angels Baseball. Today, I'm proudly declare Anaheim come back.
The park says it plans to recall 10,000 furloughed employees and open at 15% capacity.
However, over here on my left is Anaheim's Convention Center, which does not yet have a reopening date. Government officials and business leaders are calling on Governor Gavin Newsom to set a reopening date and guidelines.
The Southern California city, Anaheim, says business meetings, trade shows, and conventions are also major drivers for the state's tourism industry. In 2019, they accounted for over $66 billion in direct spending and nearly 460,000 jobs. But due to a lack of reopening guidelines, the industry could suffer even further.
Because our industry is one that may plan 6 months to 2 years in advance for their event. So by not doing that, we're not just affecting tomorrow, we're affecting possibly 6 months, a year to 5 years from now.
Governor Newsom announced last week theme parks as well as outdoor live events like sports and concerts could gradually reopen, but not so for trade shows and conventions. The governor's office reportedly told Spectrum News Thursday guidelines for business meetings and conventions could be released in the coming weeks if COVID indicators continue to improve. Reporting by Jack Bradley and Zach Lee, NTD News, Los Angeles.
Coming up, the International Olympic Committee has accepted the Chinese regime's vaccines, which has been offered to all athletes. But Olympic host nation Japan says it won't take them. And China is censoring what Americans can see in movies. That's because Hollywood is complying with China's censorship. That and more on NTD News.
Freedom! Trends may be fleeting, but values are timeless. We now bring you this new clothing brand with classic design and luxurious comfort. It's our way of sharing hope and inspiration from the world of Shenyun. We bring you Shenyun Dancer. Wear it with honor.
Japan says it won't accept Chinese vaccines. The country is preparing to host the Olympics, and the International Olympic Committee already accepted China's offer to provide the doses. NTD's Tiffany Meyer has more.
And now to Japan. The host of the Summer Olympics will not provide Chinese-made vaccines to participants of the Games. The same goes for the Winter Games in Beijing next year. Japan's Olympic minister said on Friday that Chinese vaccines have not been approved in Japan. The day before, the president of International Olympic Committee announced that the organization will buy CCP virus vaccines from China. They will be provided to participants of the Olympic Games. This announcement came when the Chinese regime is facing increasing criticism over its suppression of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. But the IOC says it's a sports body, and it will not meddle in what it calls China's domestic issues. The CCP considers all human rights issues in the country, as well as its crackdown in Hong Kong and intimidation of Taiwan, as internal affairs. The real efficacy of Chinese vaccines is not 100% clear. That's because their trial data so far is incomplete. The published data generally shows lower efficacy than vaccines produced in other countries. Canada's immigration minister says he is not concerned about Chinese influence in the country's visa system. It's over a company run by Chinese police operating a Canadian visa application center in Beijing, something the minister says he sees no issue with. The visa center is currently run by Beijing's Shuangxiong Foreign Service. The company is reportedly owned by Beijing's police agency. According to a Tuesday report by Canadian news outlet Globe and Mail, an overwhelming 86% of employees at the visa center work for Shuangxiong. Canadian opposition parliament members have also raised concerns, saying applicants' personal data will fall into the hands of the Chinese regime. They pointed out that the chair of Shuangxiong also serves as the secretary to the Communist Party, and that the company's general manager works as a deputy secretary. In addition, they highlighted a conflict of interest centered around pro-democracy activists applying at Beijing-affiliated visa centers as they are trying to flee China. The CCP has openly condemned countries for granting activists asylum on many occasions. A Canadian parliamentary committee was heard last week. It suggested removing the CCP's involvement in the visa center.
Hollywood now has more incentive to comply with Chinese censorship. That's because China is now the biggest film market in the world. NTD's Don Ma has more on Hollywood and Chinese censorship.
For the first time in history, China became the world's #1 film market. This according to 2020 movie market data. And hot on the heels came a nearly 100-page research study on China's censorship in Hollywood. The research is by literary and human rights group PEN America. It details how the movie industry in the West caters to Chinese censors. That's in order to gain access to the Chinese film market. As per the study, the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, sees films as a means of soft power. It uses this soft power to reinforce a state-approved image of the regime. For the CCP, several topics are untouchable. That's Tibet, Taiwan, Xinjiang, the South China Sea, the spiritual practice Falun Gong, top CCP leaders, the pro-democracy protests in Tiananmen Square in 1989, and Hong Kong. In recent years, many major movie studios have made more money in China than in the United States. This gives strong economic incentives for Hollywood to play by Beijing's rules. Marvel Studios' blockbuster superhero movie, Doctor Strange, gives a prominent example of censorship. In the movie, a major Tibetan character was played by British actress Tilda Swinton. The writer for the movie says this was because they didn't want to acknowledge Tibet and therefore risk getting the movie banned by the Chinese regime.
He originates from Tibet, so if you acknowledge that Tibet is a place and that he's Tibetan, you risk alienating 1 billion people who think that that's bullshit, and risk the Chinese government going, hey, you know, one of the biggest film watching countries in the world, we're not going to show your movie because you decided to get political.
Beijing frowns upon the international community for seeing Tibet as separate from China. It labels Tibet's spiritual leader Dalai Lama as a separatist. That's because he advocated for Tibet's freedoms. Tibet is under Chinese communist rule, but it has its own political leader and spiritual leader. And Hollywood is complying with these censors, not just due to economic incentives. There's also a risk those who don't comply will be boycotted. One Hollywood producer told PEN America they're afraid to make movies critical of communist China because, quote, you or your company will be actively blacklisted. Another producer told the group it's expected that you'll never work again if you insult China. Star of the 1990 film Pretty Woman, Richard Gere has been reportedly blacklisted by the CCP. In 2017, he told Hollywood Reporter that someone told him they can't make a movie with him because it would upset the Chinese. He has been very vocal about supporting Tibet and about criticizing CCP's human rights abuses.
I wonder if Deng Xiaoping is actually watching this right now with his children and his grandchildren, and with the knowledge that what a horrendous human rights situation there is in China, not only towards their own people, but to Tibet as well. And I was wondering if this kind of
During the interview with Hollywood Reporter, he said, quote, there was something I was going to do with the Chinese director, and 2 weeks before we were going to shoot, he called saying, sorry, I can't do it. Gere explained that this person canceled because his family has been threatened by authorities. Gere said, quote, if I had worked with this director, he said his family would never have been allowed to leave the country ever again. He would never work. Many Hollywood professionals PEN America spoke with pointed out to them the significance of China's influence in Hollywood. One of them said, quote, this is affecting not just what Chinese audiences see, but what Americans get to watch. Reporting by Don Ma, NTD News.
Coming up, a loophole in the new relief bill could allow creditors to seize your $1,400 stimulus check. And if you're currently using a friend's Netflix account, there may be bad news. The streaming service is testing a new feature that could crack down on password sharing. Find out more in just a moment. Already know what you'll spend your stimulus check on? Well, if you owe someone money, beware. They might be able to take it directly from your account. There's a loophole in the new relief bill that wasn't in the last one. The previous 2 stimulus checks were protected from debt collectors, but this time it's different. Democrats pushed the relief bill through using the budget reconciliation process, so they couldn't include protection from creditors in it. So now, if debt collectors want to seize the money, banks and credit unions may have to comply. But the Senate Finance Committee chair wants to introduce a standalone bill to fix the problem. Gotta hold on tight. The White House says cash payments will start arriving in some bank accounts as early as this weekend. And law enforcement increasingly relies on surveillance technology in its investigations. NTD's Sapphire Quarter explores how you might be monitored without realizing it.
Many people have seen it, some have experienced it. A car runs a red light and a camera snaps a picture of their license plate. But you may not be aware that there are cameras doing that 24/7 across the U.S. Where you are and when it happened is entered into a database, sometimes permanently. Law enforcement uses this information to find stolen cars or track down criminals, but the private sector also uses automatic license plate readers. Some companies sell the data to police stations.
I feel like it's a symptom of modern world that we live in. And if we feel that we're not being watched and analyzed and data taken from us, I think we're kidding ourselves.
Almost any camera the police operates can capture license plates and put that information into the database. That's as long as the right software is installed. But because the data is kept for a long time, some worry the information could be used to build a profile of someone's movements.
I think it's kind of concerning the fact that this data is being allocated in such a weird way, especially with license plates, and it's not being given by our consent either.
Plus, if the information is tampered with, innocent people could be convicted of a crime.
They gotta get you somehow.
But police say the cameras are very useful in recovering stolen cars. Some estimates say the cameras helped recover twice as many stolen cars for police.
Well, you don't have any privacy anymore, but also, it's just stop crime. I don't know. It's an ethnic choice, really.
People who support the system say we shouldn't be concerned because the data collected isn't enough to identify an individual. Sapphire Quarter, NTD News, New York.
Ever been surprised by one of Elon Musk's tweets? Well, it seems at least one Tesla shareholder isn't happy and is suing Musk over his Twitter antics. The lawsuit accuses Tesla's board of failing to control Musk's social media activity, even after a settlement with the SEC required that his posts get pre-approved. One example it gave is a Twitter post from last May where Musk said Tesla's stock price was too high. The shareholder says that tweet cost almost $14 billion. The investor says Musk is hurting the company's ability to secure financing. And another headache for Musk is global lithium supply, which is reportedly running low as electric vehicle demand grows. They need it for batteries. So does America have enough of this vital battery material? NTD's Evelyn Lee reports.
Booming demand for electric vehicles is supercharging lithium prices. The metal is crucial to making batteries, and we're gonna need them.
2% or so of the world's market is made up of pure electric vehicles, but that could grow substantially to 20, 30, 40% in just a little over a decade and a half.
Industry experts say the pandemic reset the market, and now we're seeing pent-up demand for electric vehicles. And a lack of investment in new lithium supply is sparking concerns. There isn't enough supply of the battery metal.
Pretty much everybody has gone in for lithium as the battery of choice.
Most of the lithium supply comes from Australia, as well as salt lakes in Chile and Argentina. Much of the lithium in the U.S. is by the state of Arizona, but it's not normally the type that's easy to convert into batteries.
There'd be problems coming up with enough lithium to use for a major electrification effort, not just in the U.S., but in China, Europe, and other parts of the world. The real pressure now will be on efforts to find new sources.
Not only passenger cars and light trucks are going electric. The trend is spreading from toothbrushes to homes. Analyst James Jerry told the Wall Street Journal that rising lithium prices will likely draw in new investors. But miners will have to be careful if they want to keep the prices high. Evelyn Lee, NTD News.
Bad news for some Netflix families. It's testing a new feature that could crack down on password sharing, asking some viewers to verify if they live in the same household as the owner of accounts they use. Jason Albano reports.
Netflix is testing a new feature to clamp down on password sharing. The world's largest streaming service said on Thursday a small number of users will be asked to verify if they share a household with the account holder. It does this by asking for details sent via text message or email, sent directly to the owner. Viewers may delay the verification and keep watching Netflix, but the message may reappear when they return, and they could eventually be required to open a new account to continue streaming. One Netflix spokesperson said this will ensure that people using a certain account have the permission to do so. Netflix's terms of service say users of an account must live in the same household.
Coming up, UK police confirm that the body found in a woodland outside London is the body of missing woman Sarah Everard. She disappeared earlier this month while walking home. The UK government launches a post-Brexit exchange program with placements for 35,000 students to study abroad. Find out more after the break. British police confirm that the human remains found in a woodland outside London is the body of missing woman Sarah Everard. The 33-year-old disappeared earlier this month while walking home alone from a friend's house. NTD's Neil Woodrow brings us the latest details.
The body has now been recovered and a formal identification procedure has been undertaken. I can now confirm that it is the body of Sarah Everard.
It's news the family had feared. Police confirm the body found 2 days ago in a woodland in Kent was that of the missing woman. Speaking on Thursday, Everard's family said, "Our beautiful daughter Sarah was taken from us, and we are appealing for any information that will help to solve this terrible crime." But for police, another investigation is underway into their own handling of the case. The Independent Office of Police Conduct, or IOPC, says the investigation follows a Met Police Conduct referral and is connected to the arrest of a serving Met Police officer on suspicion of kidnap, murder and a separate allegation of indecent exposure. Several days before Everard disappeared, the arrested officer had been reported over allegations of indecent exposure in a South London fast food restaurant. On Wednesday, the IOPC determined that 2 conduct referrals against the arrested officer should remain under the local investigation of the Metropolitan Police. The suspect was arrested on Tuesday evening. The police can hold a murder suspect in custody for up to 96 hours, after which they must either charge them with a crime or release them. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, London.
Between Brexit and the lockdowns, trade between the UK and the EU plunged in January. Exports were down over 40% and imports fell by nearly 30%. But economists say overall the UK economy is doing better than expected. NTD's Patrick Hayden takes a look.
Trade between the UK and the EU in January, the month after the UK left the European Union, dropped significantly. Exports to the EU were down nearly 41% and imports fell by nearly 29%. The Office of National Statistics, or ONS, says that during the previous 2 months, imports and exports increased, indicating stockpiling before the transition. This was most notable with machinery, transport equipment and chemicals. Changes in paperwork at the border also likely contributed to the slowing in trade for January. Nationwide lockdown starting in the beginning of the year contributed too. The ONS noted that during the end of the month, trade did pick up. But overall, the UK economy held up in January with GDP down just 2.9%. Economists polled by Reuters were expecting a contraction of 4.9%. The Bank of England looks set to keep its stimulus programs on hold next Thursday. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
The UK government launches a post-Brexit exchange program for students to study abroad. It will fund 35,000 places for study, school exchange, and work placements. Here's NTD's Jane Werrell with the story.
A new post-Brexit study programme called the Turing Scheme will enable students to study and work abroad. It replaces the one which the UK used to be signed up to while part of the EU. The Prime Minister had originally pledged for the UK to stay a part of the Erasmus scheme, but said he withdrew on financial grounds. A decision he defended in the Commons earlier in the week.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I think students should choose the Turing Project because it's fantastic and it reaches out across the whole country. And I believe, by the way, Mr. Speaker,
the main difference between the two schemes is that the Erasmus scheme is focused around the EU, whereas the Turing scheme is worldwide. The Department of Education says it will cost £110 million to fund 35,000 exchanges from September. The government says it gives more opportunities to disadvantaged people, but critics are saying it offers far less support compared to the Erasmus scheme. Ministers are visiting the devolved nations to promote it across the UK. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
The Cliff House has closed for good, but this other restaurant in California is still going. And one regular customer wants to make sure it stays that way. He's pulling an unusual stunt to do it. NTD's Colin Fredrickson reports.
Stuntman Hunter Ray Barker has gone to extreme lengths to save his favorite local restaurant by sitting in bean dip for 24 hours.
I'm spending 24 hours in this tub of bean dip for Los Toros. I just think we have a golden opportunity to grab the bull by the horn and support local businesses in a big, explosive way, because why not?
Barker worried that Los Toros Mexican restaurant was struggling because of the pandemic. So to try and bring attention to the business and encourage people to go there, he decided to do something he's never done before.
The first time I've ever sat in a tub of bean dip, ever. Definitely the first time will be spending 24 hours in it.
For the dip, Barker mixed beans, flour, and seasoning. And for bathroom breaks, he has a funnel. Los Toros was established in the 1960s and has been in northwest Los Angeles ever since. The owner says his father always had the mantra, if you give to the community, it will give back to you. And Barker is doing just that.
I was pretty astounded when he said that he wanted to do this, and I was like, are you sure? Are you sure you want to do this? And he goes, yeah, I think it'd be fun, and it's something that I want to try to help the business go.
Some diners like Barker's stunt.
He's going to sit in that for 24 hours, totally crazy. I wouldn't do it, but you know what? Hey, it's going to help Los Toros and the community. I'm all for it.
Barker says he believes small businesses are the backbone of the nation, and other people should follow his lead in supporting local businesses.
It is our duty to support them, and I just think if we can do that in a fun way and in a way that encourages other people to bring some excitement to the small businesses as well, I think is really, really helpful. And so I think now is the best time to do it.
To prove his loyalty to the restaurant even further, Barker also had its logo of 3 bulls tattooed on his arm.
In a whoop, and so it's literally just a quad that it's pretty small and able to fit through small spaces, and the transmitter is this camera down here, and it just goes right to the goggles, and then the GoPro's what's getting your cinematic video at the end of the day, and obviously there's no audio you can get from it because it's a buzzing drones.
It's more of a scene than a story, right? It's not exactly, it's painting the picture of kind of getting back out with the friends and a night at a bowling alley, which I think we all really miss.
It's time to spring forward this weekend. Don't forget to turn your clocks ahead 1 hour for daylight savings, which starts at 2 a.m. Sunday. The tradition is meant to give people extra sunlight in the evening hours, though Hawaii and Arizona don't change their clocks for daylight savings. We'll be running on this new time schedule until November. And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.
Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.